For nearly 40 years, Moses faithfully served God by leading the people of Israel. Through thick and thin, and there was a lot of thin, he dutifully kept his charge to shepherd the people out of Egypt to the promised land. Nevertheless, when he was on the cusp of completing his mission, his dream of rest in the land of milk and honey was quickly erased. The fateful scene is recorded for us in Numbers chapter 20, verses 1 through 13. These 13 verses hold three profound truths for us today. Truths that we need to know. And more importantly, we need to practice so that we won't be barred from the promised land of heaven. Let's begin reading. Numbers chapter 20, beginning with verse 1. And the people of Israel, the whole congregation, came into the wilderness of Zin in the first month, and the people stayed at Kadesh. And Miriam died there and was buried there. Now there was no water for the congregation, and they assembled themselves against Moses and against Aaron. And the people quarreled with Moses and said, "Would that we had perished when our brothers perished before the Lord." That's probably during Korah's rebellion is the reference there, Numbers 16. "Why have you brought the assembly of the Lord into the wilderness that we should die here, both we and our cattle? Why have you made us come up out of Egypt to bring us to this evil place? Is there no place for grain? This is no place for grain or figs or vines or pomegranates, and there is no water to drink." Then Moses and Aaron went from the presence of the assembly to the entrance of the tent of meeting and fell on their faces. And the glory of the Lord appeared to them. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Take the staff and assemble the congregation, you and Aaron your brother. Tell the rock before their eyes to yield its water. So you shall bring water out of the rock for them and give drink to the congregation and their cattle." And Moses took the staff from before the Lord as he commanded him. Then Moses and Aaron gathered the assembly together before the rock. And he said to them, "Hear now, you rebels, shall we bring water for you out of this rock?" And Moses lifted up his hand, and he struck the rock with the staff twice, and water came out abundantly, and the congregation drank and their livestock. And the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "Because you did not believe in me, to uphold me as holy in the eyes of the people of Israel, therefore you shall not bring this assembly into the land that I have given you. These are the waters of Meribah, where the people of Israel quarreled with the Lord, and through them He showed Himself to be holy." Let's unpack this for just a moment. In the first part of verse 1, we find Israel is camping in a land called Kadesh. They've been wandering now for probably about 39 to nearly the 40 years. They have been wandering. This is just one of those places where they camp. It's here that the sister of Moses and Aaron, Miriam, dies, and she is buried. The prophetess Miriam, who has been one of the leaders with the people, finds her end here. Well, the people began to complain. It was one of their spiritual gifts. Well, they're doing it a lot. It was one of their gifts to complain. And they're complaining about the same thing they've always been complaining about. There's no water. Why have you brought us out of this land of Egypt? Oh, it had just been better if we'd have died with those other people that God struck down. It would have been better if we just never left Egypt and died as slaves there than to die of thirst here. So Moses does what Moses does. He goes before the Lord. He takes the complaint of the people and he goes and sees what God has in store for them to provide for them. Because God has been providing. He is providing the manna. He is providing the quail. He has provided all the water along the way. He has provided for their health. He has provided for everything. So Moses goes and says, "God, what do you want us to do?" And so God says, "There's a big rock before you. Go speak to it. And when you speak to it, water will come forth, not only for the people, but also for the cattle." Can I do a quick aside, just real quick? In the high school class on Sunday mornings, we are working through the Gospel of Matthew. And what I'm trying to teach the kids in there, the young people in there, is to be able to learn how to read biblical narrative, especially how to read the gospel narratives, to pick up on little things. There's a little thing right here. Whenever humans and animals are mentioned together, that's to show the totality of whatever is going on. So when Jonah goes to the city of Nineveh, who fast? The people and the cattle. Who is given water here? The people and the cattle. And so whenever you see people and animals, and it's generally cattle, together, whatever action is going on, it's to signify that it was great and that it was abundant and that it was thorough. So the fasting in Nineveh is thorough. The watering here is abundant. And we see that because we have both together. Well, Moses takes one look at those people and says, I don't like none of y'all. And he takes the staff before the Lord, and in anger he strikes the rock. And he strikes it again. And guess what? Water comes forth abundantly. Well, in verse 12, we have God's rebuke of Moses. There's a 13th one here. It's not in your notes if you're taking notes. But verse 13 is a summary statement. Moses does not show God to be holy. God shows himself to be holy. Summary statement. You can add that one in your notes. There's three truths. There are three lessons that we need to learn from this passage. That's what I want to share with you tonight. Number one. First and foremost, sin is a heart issue. Sin is a heart issue. The New Year's Eve party, when I wasn't making a fool of myself singing with Mike, I would go up to a few people and I'd say, quick question for you. Why was Moses barred from the promised land? Is that a trick question? Because he hit the rock. Quick question. Why was Moses barred from the promised land? Oh, Dave talked about that on Wednesday night. It's because. And I was getting both answers. One, because he struck the rock. Two, because he did not honor God as holy. Growing up, I can remember being in Bible class. Sandra Parchman was my teacher. We were going down at East Side in Waverly. It was on the east side of Waverly. Nathan Haygood was our preacher. And I can remember being a kid listening to Nathan talk about being in Vietnam. And he would always dabble those stories into his sermons. And I can just remember him talking about all of that. And I can remember being taught this. And this was how it was taught to me. He was barred from the promised land because he struck the rock. And there was always been this emphasis on the action. But you know, when we come to the text, there's a greater emphasis on his heart. The heart of Moses is what God emphasizes. Take a look with me. Just go with me through the passages here. Let's go to Numbers. Look at Numbers 20. Look at verse 12. And the Lord said to Moses, because you did not believe in me. Where does that come from? That comes from the heart. Because you did not believe in me. Because you did not uphold me as holy in the eyes of the people of Israel. Where does that come from? It comes from the heart. Look with me over in chapter 27. Numbers chapter 27. It's amazing to me just how often this story is repeated by Moses. Numbers chapter 27. We're just going to look at one verse there. Two, I guess. We'll start at verse 13. And when you see it, you shall be gathered. He says, when you die, you shall be gathered to your people. Because you rebelled against my word in the wilderness of Zin when the congregation quarreled, failing to uphold me as holy at the waters before their eyes. he rebelled against God. There's a rebellion in action, but there's a rebellion that comes from the heart that says, I'm not going to regard God and His commandment as holy. Go with me to the book of Deuteronomy. Let's go to Deuteronomy 32. Look with me, start at in verse 48, the Lord has spoken to Moses, and He says in verse 49, it's time for you to go up to the mountain. It's time for you to die. And He repeats to him in verse 51, why? Because you broke faith with me in the midst of the people of Israel at the waters of Meribah, Kadesh, in the wilderness of Zin, because you did not treat me as holy in the midst of the people of Israel. No doubt there is an action that he committed that was wrong. In fact, there's actually two. One, he spoke rashly by saying, shall we? And then two, he struck the rock. But that at the heart of his action is his heart. Because he could have gone up there and had spoken to the rock and his heart not be right, and his whole entire action could have still been sinful because he was not regarding God as holy. I think we make a mistake when we come to this story and we try to teach it to our kids, and we try to teach it to ourselves, and focusing on him just striking the rock is not the full story. We have to focus on the heart of the matter. And the heart of the matter is that he was not regarding God as holy, that he was not believing God, that he was not faithful to God's word. If there is anything in our life that we need to understand about sin, it is not just correcting bad behavior. It's about correcting a heart. Because if we're just focused on bad behavior and not the heart, that makes us what? Hypocrites. And if there was one thing that made our Lord Jesus angry in this world, it was a hypocrite. I'm going to pull out some of the words of Jesus just to emphasize the point. Go with me to Mark chapter 7. Mark chapter 7. In the midst of a discussion about what defiles a person, Jesus says that it's not what's on the outside of a person that defiles him. It's what comes out, verse 20. It's what comes out of a person. That is what defiles him. For from within, out of the heart of man, come evil thoughts, sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, coveting, wickedness, deceit, sensuality, envy, slander, pride, foolishness. All these evil things come from within, and they defile a person. If you want to get a handle on sin in your life, you don't do that by merely cutting out sinful actions. You've got to get to the heart of the matter that sees God as holy, that believes in His Word, that maintains faith with Him. Because what Paul says to us in Romans chapter 12, is that we need to allow ourselves to be shaped by God. He says in Romans chapter 12, beginning at verse 1, I appeal to you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal, by the rebirth, by the changing of your mind. Can I insert the word heart there? By changing your heart, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good, acceptable, and perfect. Don't be conformed to this world. Don't let the world shape you. Let God shape you. But not just your actions, but shape your heart. Because if we give Him our heart, everything else will fall in place. If we're just focused on action, we're just as sinful as we were to begin with. Let me give you number 2. Anger does not produce the righteousness of God. Anger does not produce the righteousness of God. In Psalm 106, this scene is recounted for us. Verse 32 beginning, it says, the children of Israel, they angered him. They angered Moses at the waters of Meribah. And it went ill with Moses on their account, for they made his spirit bitter, and he spoke rashly with his lips. Let me ask you a question, because we need to empathize for just a moment with Moses. How would you have felt if you were Moses on that day? How would you have felt if for 30 some odd years you've been listening to these people whine and complain? Oh, if there's one thing that just gets under my skin, you know, Shelley, just the one thing that gets under my skin is to hear people complain, especially when they ain't got no right to complain. Post office is full of a bunch of complainers. I've learned that. Oh, if I was Moses, I wouldn't have took that stick to the rock. I'd have been busting heads. Aren't we supposed to be honest here? What would you have done? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. She would have too. What would you have done? Maybe you would do, or maybe you would have done what you do now. There are great warnings in Scripture about anger. Be angry, Paul says, but what? Do not sin. James warns us, anger does not do what? Produce the righteousness of God. Where are you susceptible to anger in your life? When you get angry at the kids or at your spouse, what do? Do you yell? Do you try to berate people with your words and your volume? Do you throw things? Are there broken pictures in your home? Do vases need to be swept up off the floor? Are chairs overturned? Maybe tables? When you get angry, do you name call? Do you insult? Do you try to berate people with your words? What kind of righteousness does that produce? Oh, it might make us feel better. I might feel better. But do your kids feel better? Does your spouse feel better? We live in an angry world where anger is accepted by the world. But we just read that Paul says, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the changing and the renewal of your heart. All of us need to be very honest with ourselves about where we fall short with letting anger take control of our lives. Moses is described as being what kind of man? Meek. Meek. But I just did a quick search, and I don't think I've even got them all. In Exodus chapter 11 and verse 8, Moses' anger is highlighted. In Exodus chapter 16 and verse 20, Moses' anger is highlighted. Exodus chapter 32, verse 19, we're told about Moses' anger. Numbers chapter 16 and verse 15, Moses is angry. Numbers chapter 20, Moses is angry. Numbers chapter 13 and verse 14, Moses is angry. If the meekest man who ever lived can struggle with anger, how much more me? I'll be the first one tonight. I'm a yeller. I'm a yeller. And it ain't right. And I'm going to do better. Because it ain't producing any righteousness in me. And it ain't going to make the kids do right. What about you? The question that I have in your notes is, where in your life do you fall short of mastering your anger? How do you express your anger in unrighteous ways? What's your plan for change? Be honest with yourself. Be honest. And seek to do what's right. Let me give you number 3. Sin has consequences. Sin has consequences. You know, we haven't really focused much on Aaron tonight. I've mentioned him in the reading, but he's a part of this story too. I did the same survey thing. Why was Aaron barred from the promised land? You know what most people said? Because he made the golden calf. No. He's barred for the exact same thing Moses was barred for. For not keeping faith with God and seeing that God was holy in the eyes of the people. Did you pick up on that? Let's go back to Numbers 20 real quick. Let's make sure we're all on the same page. See, that's one of the reasons that we should not focus on the idea that Moses was barred from the promised land because he struck the rock. Because Aaron didn't strike the rock. But Aaron's barred for the exact same reason as Moses. Go back to Numbers chapter 20. Verse 10, Then Moses and Aaron gathered all the assembly together before the rock, and Moses said to them, Hear now, you rebels, shall we, me and my brother, bring water to you out of this rock? Now Moses lifted up his hand and struck the rock. Water comes forth. Verse 12, And the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, Because you, that's actually y'all, because y'all did not believe in me to uphold me as holy in the eyes of the people, therefore y'all shall not bring this assembly into the land that I have given them. Aaron is condemned for the same thing Moses is. And he gets the same exact sentence. You will not go to the promised land. But have you ever read about how Aaron dies? Well, you don't have to go very far because it's in the same chapter. Look with me beginning at verse 22. And so they journeyed from Kadesh. This is Numbers 20, verse 22. They journeyed from Kadesh, and the people of Israel, the whole congregation, to the Mount Hor. And the Lord said to Moses and Aaron at Mount Hor on the border of the land of Edom, Let Aaron be gathered to his people, and he shall not enter the land that I have given to the people of Israel, because you rebelled, that's a y'all rebelled against me and my command at the Waters of Meribah. Take Aaron and Eleazar his son, and bring them up to Mount Hor, and strip Aaron of his garments, and put them on Eleazar his son. And Aaron shall be gathered to his people, and he shall die there. So Moses did as the Lord commanded, and they went up to Mount Hor in the sight of all the congregation. And Moses stripped Aaron of his garments, and he put them on Eleazar his son. And Aaron died there on the top of the mountain. Then Moses and Eleazar came down from the mountain. I'm going to tell you, that's really humiliating. God says to Moses, all right, get your brother, and y'all going to go up there and take his son with you and defrock him. Take off all the vestal garments and put them on his son. And then he's going to die. And y'all going to watch. Have you ever read about how Moses died? Well, Moses gets to keep living. And then he gets to give this humongously long speech called Deuteronomy. And then God says, okay, it's time. So go with me to Deuteronomy 34. If this is a movie, this is where the stirring music begins to play. And Moses went up from the plains of Moab to Mount Nebo to the top of Pisgah, which is opposite of Jericho. And the Lord showed him all the lands of Gilead as far as Dan, all of Naphtali, and the land of Ephraim and Manasseh, and all the land of Judah as far as the western sea, to the Negeb and the plain that is the valley of Jericho, to the city of palm trees as far as Zoar. And the Lord said to him, this is the land of which I swore to Abraham and Isaac and to Jacob. I will give it to your offspring. I have let you see it with your eyes, but you shall not go there. And so Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in the land of Moab, according to the word of the Lord. And God buried him in the valley of the land of Moab, opposite of Beth Peor. But no one knows the place of his burial to this day. Moses was 120 years old when he died. His eyes were undimmed and his vigor unabated. So peaceful. Gets to go on one last stroll all by himself. Gets to see the beauty of the promised land. And while he's sitting there on a rock, just overlooking all of this, he breathes his last. And the gentle, graceful hand of God reaches down from, I'm being dramatic here, okay? Reaches down from heaven, sweeps away some rock, and buries his friend, his servant Moses there, and covers him over. So peaceful. And yet you contrast that to Aaron. I wonder what Aaron is saying. Does Aaron have a right to complain about the way he died? I mean, he and Moses did the same thing. In fact, if you want to make an argument, Moses did worse. And yet if we compare and we contrast these two, God deals more harshly with Aaron than he does Moses. And what we need to recognize is that, yes, sin has consequences, but the consequences are mediated by a just and sovereign God. If I know somebody has sinned and I've done the same thing, and they get to keep their job, and they get to keep their marriage, and they get to keep their place in the church, and they get to keep this, and they get to keep that. It don't seem like nothing happened to them, but I did the same exact thing, and I don't get nothing. My life's miserable. Do I have a right to complain to God? No. Because sin has consequences. And if we believe that God is just, and we believe that God is true, and if we believe that God is faithful to His people, and if we believe what the Hebrew writer says, that God disciplines us for our good, then here am I, Lord. Do what seems good to you. I want to tell you, that's tough. That's a tough teaching. But it's true. In a fit of reckless anger, Moses hardened his heart. He spoke rashly. He acted recklessly. In a moment, he threw it all away. He was barred from entering the promised land. What about you and me? All of us have made a commitment to live our lives for Christ. As we walk this journey of faith, are we merely restraining our actions, or are we continually reforming our hearts? And what about our anger? Does it control us, or have we mastered it? Do you see God as the holy sovereign who works His will in all things? Because we're all moving toward a day of judgment, when each of us must stand before the God of the universe. Will He welcome you into the land of rest? Or will you be barred from the promised land of heaven? The choice is yours. Choose wisely. If we can help you with something this evening, we all stand ready to walk together in this journey. Whatever it is, won't you come while we stand and sing?